How do you ask clear and articulate questions? And we're going to look at an example of Deepika Padukone. She's the one interviewing Ariana Huffington, and the questions that she asks over here are something for us to study. We've spent the past 5 years training people from all over the world, and this is a question that gets asked way too often. That, okay, I know how to articulate a response, but what if I'm the one asking questions? And many times when we don't know how to ask questions correctly, we end up getting very bland responses, and it can result in us having shallow conversations without much depth. So whether you're at work or a personal setting, how do you ask clear and articulate questions? So we're going to get into how do you stop asking basic questions to avoid basic responses? How do you articulate a question to ensure you get elaborate responses? And a mindset shift that will allow you to articulate your questions no matter what setting you're in. Let's get into it. By the way, if you're new here, my name is Deep from Frantically Speaking. If you're looking to level up your communication skills, you can subscribe to this channel because we release regular communications content. And if you want to take your journey to the next level, you can book a free consultation call with us by clicking on the Calendly link given in the description below. You can chat with us to see if we can work together. The first thing we want to do to avoid asking basic questions and hence not get basic responses is to avoid asking things that are very common, that don't require much brain power to answer. Questions like, hi, how are you? This, that. We want to avoid those questions because those responses are so inundated in our minds that we just don't even think about responding to them. Instead, we want to use something called as connection points. And to explain this concept, watch this clip.
How was the change for you? Because, I moved from a city called Bangalore down south in India to Mumbai when I was about 19. What was the change like for you from Athens, not coming from a lot of money, not knowing the language, moving to a really big city like London?
If you noticed, Deepika Padukone first talks about her own experience with shifting cities and then moves on to asking a question. This is what we refer to as connection points. We're trying to draw similarities beyond just asking question after question after question. It helps us to put forward a question that actually can get a much more empathetic response because the other person understands that, oh, maybe he or she has been through similar situation. Let me respond accordingly. And she does this again in a much more elaborate way when Ariana Huffington is talking about how good things sometimes come out of bad experiences. And instead of just diving directly into her next question, Deepika first responds to the response that she got, adds on to the conversation, and then moves on to asking the next question. Watch this clip.
You need to be patient in that process. And all the good things that come out of some of the bad things that happen in our life, you don't necessarily realize in that moment. But as you sort of power through and time goes by, and then I think it's then when you look back at your journey or at your life and you reflect and you realize, wow, that opportunity actually forced me and pushed me towards doing something that you'd probably never thought of or imagined.
Absolutely.
Do you think the Huffington Post would have happened if you didn't do that, make that shift?
Now, another thing we want to do to ensure that we're not asking basic questions is to avoid yes-no questions. Essentially, these are just questions where a person can respond in 1 or 2 words and be done with it. Instead, to encourage deeper and more meaningful responses, we want to articulate open-ended questions. Watch how Deepika does this.
So what are some of the challenges that you probably experienced, as you set up or at the, beginning of your Huffington Post journey?
So a lot of challenges, and I'm so happy you're asking me about that.
Now, this question could have just been asked as, oh, was that situation challenging for you? And that can result in a much shallower response. But by asking an open-ended question, we're much more likely to take the conversation to a better place. You can also do this on a larger context, especially if you're meeting somebody for the first time. Just ask them about their story, like how she did in this clip.
Ariana, let's start by talking about your childhood. You were born in Athens, you grew up in Athens. Tell us a little bit about your life in Greece.
But sometimes asking somebody about their story can feel a little too deep or formal in a casual setting. So instead, you can isolate one incident that you know about them and ask them to elaborate on that story itself, like how she did here.
I remember very clearly when we met and you spoke about that moment when, you were overworked and there was a day when you collapsed.
Yes.
What was that moment?
But asking open-ended questions is not enough. Sometimes the other person, even though we've asked an open-ended question, can respond in a bit of a bland manner and something we can't really control. In those cases, we want to shift our mindset towards asking questions in the first place. We don't want to ask questions for the sake of asking questions because that can result in shallow communication. Instead, the holy grail of asking articulate questions is by understanding one thing. What is the goal that I'm trying to achieve by asking this particular question? And this goal doesn't need to be something very formal, elaborate, or something of a higher order. It can be a lot simpler as well. For example, in this clip, Ariana Huffington is talking about small habits or small changes she makes to her life to improve her daily performance. And after Deepika Padukone gets a response, here's what she follows it up with.
What are those little changes that you've brought about?
And that's very, very crucial here. The person asking the question got the response on habits, but she didn't get a very clear understanding of what those small tweaks and habit changes were. So to get very specific and ask for real examples can help us to achieve whatever goal we have in our mind to ask a question. And that goes much beyond general articulation principles of using filler words and being very crisp with our questioning, so on and so forth. The point is, whatever goal we have, whatever information we wanted, have we gotten that? If not, we can probe deeper. But what if you're on the other side of the conversation? You're the one who has to answer questions. Here's a video that you can watch on how to articulate a response clearly. And we've taken an example of one of the most articulate speakers that I've heard of, Priyanka Chopra.